You really think someone like you belongs out here? The businessman sneered, his gaze locked on the scars tracing Isabella Cruz's face and arm. She didn't flinch. She just smiled quietly and said, I've served men like you before, but in far worse places. The diner buzzed with an uneasy silence. The next morning, everything changed. The streets outside the diner filled with figures standing in the dawn mist, each holding a small cloth-wrapped token. They weren't strangers. They were Marines one by one. They stepped inside, not to order breakfast, but to honor the woman the world had tried to forget and whom they had sworn never to. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when Isabella Cruz unlocked the door of May's Diner, just off the dusty stretch of Highway 12. The neon open sign flickered to life as she flipped the switch, bathing the window in a soft red glow. Inside the diner smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee and bleach. It was still and quiet, the kind of quiet you could only find in a place before the world woke up. Isabella moved with practiced ease. She tied her faded blue apron behind her back, turned on the griddle and began the slow, steady ritual of bringing the place to life. Coffee brewed, bacon sizzled. Booths were wiped down with rhythmic precision. Everything about her movements suggested calm control and care. But what most people noticed first wasn't her grace. It was the scars. They began just below her right temple, raised and uneven, then continued down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. On days when she wore short sleeves, they reappeared along her right forearm like winding trails carved by fire. These weren't paper-cut scars or childhood mishaps. They were deep, discolored reminders of something far more severe. New customers often froze for a moment when they first saw her. Some blinked and quickly looked away. Others stared too long before remembering their manners. And every now and then, a child would point and whisper only to be hushed by a flustered parent. The regulars. They didn't ask questions. They just accepted that Isabella Cruz was part of the diner, like the chipped salt shakers or the creak in booth. Number 4, dependable, silent, unchanging. No one knew much about her beyond the apron and quiet smile. She never spoke of her past. She never talked about where she went after work. She always arrived by 5:00 a.m., always left after the lunch rush, always walked home alone. To most, she was just the scarred waitress with the steady hands. But there was so much they didn't know. Years earlier, long before she wore aprons and served coffee, Isabella Cruz had worn a different kind of uniform, one that came with no tips and no safe exits. She had been a combat medic with the United States Marine Corps Echo 12 Division. Her specialty, frontline triage under fire. Her job had been patching up wounded Marines when evacuation wasn't yet an option. She'd done it in blinding sandstorms beneath mortar fire and in makeshift shelters where supplies were short and decisions had to be made in seconds. She had once gone 3 days without sleep while treating a convoy ambushed in Fallujah. The scars came during her second tour. A supply transport had been struck just outside Forward Operating Base Courage. 2 Marines were trapped inside. As flames devoured the vehicle, Isabella didn't hesitate. She rushed in, no helmet, no backup, just gauze, adrenaline, and duty. She managed to pull both men out. Seconds later, a secondary explosion erupted. Shrapnel tore into her side. Her right arm was burned as she shielded one of the Marines with her body. She remembered the heat, the blood, the distant sound of someone shouting her name. Then darkness. She woke up in a field hospital 2 days later. A nurse whispered, "You're lucky to be alive." Her records would later say, severe trauma sustained during active combat while rescuing personnel under fire. Her commanding officer recommended her for a commendation. She received a Purple Heart. And then, she disappeared. Civilian life wasn't easy. Job interviews ended with polite rejections when employers saw her scars. She was told she wasn't a good fit for customer-facing roles. Eventually, she stopped trying. May's Diner had been the first place that didn't flinch. Margaret Benson, the owner, had simply said, "Can you be here by 5 a.m.?" Isabella had nodded, and from that day on, the diner became her battlefield of peace. No one in town knew she had once saved lives beneath falling mortar shells. No one guessed that the woman silently refilling their coffee had once held the artery of a dying man between her fingers to stop him from bleeding out. To them, she was just Izzy, the quiet one, who always remembered your order and never missed a shift. But beneath the quiet surface, Isabella Cruz carried a past woven with fire duty and sacrifice. And one morning that passed would come walking back through the diner's front door, not with words, but with honor, silence, and remembrance. Tuesday mornings at May's Diner usually passed without drama. The early regulars trickled in truckers, construction workers, a retired school principal with a crossword habit. They sipped their coffee in peace, nodded politely at Isabella Cruz, and talked about the weather or football or nothing at all. But this morning was different. At 8:37 a.m., the front door jingled and three men in pressed shirts and loosened ties stepped inside. Out-of-towners clearly probably passing through for a business meeting in the city. Their cologne hung in the air like arrogance, and their laughter was louder than necessary, disrupting the quiet rhythm of the room. They slid into the corner booth by the window and kept talking as if the rest of the diner didn't exist. Isabella approached with her usual quiet grace, menus in hand, coffee pot balanced effortlessly. She greeted them with a nod and set down the menus as she leaned forward to pour their coffee. The largest of the three paused mid-sentence. His eyes locked on the scars that traced her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. He didn't even bother to lower his voice. "You really think someone like you should be out here serving people?" He sneered, his smirk curling like smoke. "Wouldn't dishwashing in the back be more appropriate?" The words hit the air like a dropped plate. Forks paused. Coffee cups froze midair. An elderly couple at booth 6 looked away. The cook, midway through flipping a pancake, stopped cold. The diner held its breath. Isabella straightened, her expression unreadable. She looked him in the eye, calm, unshaken, and then she said simply, "I've served men like you before, but in far worse places." The businessman blinked clearly, not expecting a reply. His two companions chuckled awkwardly, trying to recover the moment. He leaned back, scoffing. "Don't tell me you were in the military," he said, eyes sweeping her scars like an insult. "With that face, you wouldn't make it past the parking lot at recruitment." The laughter that followed wasn't shared. No one joined in. Not the waitress at the register, not the old man in the back booth, not the truck driver who stood up, dropped a $10 bill on the table beside his half-eaten eggs, and walked out without a word. Isabella didn't respond. She just moved on, pouring coffee into a regular's cup, steady hands betraying the slight tremble that followed. Her face remained calm, but her eyes, they scanned the room, reading every expression like a field report. Near the service station, Margaret Benson had seen enough. "You all right, Izzy?" she asked softly, stepping beside her. The worry etched into her wrinkles was genuine. "I'm fine," Isabella replied, folding napkins. "I've dealt with worse in Fallujah." Margaret's jaw tightened, and she laid a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "You don't have to take their order. I can do it." But Isabella shook her head. "No need," she said. "Some people fear what they don't understand. It's not my job to teach them." And with that, she picked up the coffee pot again and returned to the tables. At the next booth, a man wearing a worn Marine Corps cap nodded at her. He didn't say anything, just left a 20 on a $5 tab. As he passed by, their eyes met. The look said it all, a shared language, a mutual respect. Back at the corner booth, the businessmen had gone quiet. Whether from embarrassment or discomfort, no one knew. They ate quickly, paid in cash, and left without another word. But the damage was done. Or maybe in some strange way, the healing had begun, because later that day someone posted about the incident online. Just a short story, no names, no photos, about a scarred waitress who handled cruelty with grace, and a diner full of people who finally saw her. The post was shared once, then 10 times, then 100. By nightfall it had reached veterans groups across the country, but Isabella didn't know that yet. She closed the diner as always, sweeping the floor, wiping down the counter, and switching off the open sign. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and inside, one woman stood alone, scarred, unshaken, and more dignified than the world had any right to expect. Tomorrow the world would return, and this time it would remember her. Before she was Isabella Cruz, the quiet woman behind the counter at May's Diner. She was simply Corpsman Cruz, a combat medic assigned to Echo 12, a Marine logistics unit stationed near Fallujah during the height of the conflict. She didn't enlist to be a hero. She enlisted because after her brother died in Afghanistan, she couldn't sit still anymore. She was 23, stubborn, and filled with a strange mix of anger and conviction. The recruiter had warned her, "You won't be on the front lines. Medics don't go looking for trouble." But in Iraq, trouble never asked for permission. Her job was to keep people alive long enough to get them home. That meant bleeding out in transport trucks, stabilizing blast injuries in craters, and using belts as tourniquets when the medical kits ran dry. She became known for her calm under pressure, her hands like steel when everything around her was chaos. But no mission had tested her like the one in March 2010. Echo 12 had been rotating supplies between outposts when their convoy was ambushed. Mortar fire rained down near Fob Courage, a forward operating base surrounded by low walls and not nearly enough protection. Isabella had just finished checking inventory in one of the armored transports when the first explosion hit. She dove instinctively, counting the seconds between blasts. Screams followed, fire, smoke, static on the radio. And somewhere nearby, a vehicle had taken a direct hit. She didn't wait for backup, didn't pause to put on body armor. She grabbed her pack and ran toward the smoke. 2 Marines were trapped inside the burning transport, the heat warping the metal doors. One was unconscious. The other was screaming, pinned beneath a crumpled seat frame. Isabella climbed in through a shattered side panel. She ignored the fire chewing through the front cabin. She ignored the shouts behind her, telling her to stop. She pulled the first Marine out by his flak jacket, dragging him across gravel as the soles of her boots melted against hot metal. She went back for the second. The blast came just as she lifted him free. A secondary explosion tore through the side of the vehicle, flinging Isabella into a concrete barrier. She hit hard right arm, first then rolled. The air left her lungs like a punch. Her face burned. Her ears rang. And everything faded to gray. She remembered only fragments after that. The feeling of blood soaking into her uniform, the scent of diesel and charred flesh, a voice yelling her name, then the thump, thump, thump of a medevac chopper overhead. She woke up 2 days later in a field hospital, her right arm bandaged, her face wrapped. A nurse stood over her whispering, "You made it." For weeks she couldn't look at herself in the mirror. The skin grafts were raw, the burns painful. The doctors told her she was lucky she still had use of her arm, but the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was knowing she couldn't go back. Her commanding officer visited her just before her discharge. "You saved 2 lives that day," he said, handing her a citation for extraordinary valor under fire. She barely looked at it. "You're not just a corpsman," he added. "You're the reason they're coming home." She nodded but didn't respond. She wasn't used to praise. She was used to doing her job. When she was flown back to the States, she was met by silence. No parade, no band, no crowd, just paperwork and a box with her belongings. Inside it, her uniform, her boots, and a Purple Heart she didn't feel she deserved. Isabella moved to a small town in North Carolina, far from military bases and veterans' hospitals. She rented a modest apartment. She got a job at a diner where no one asked questions, and she tried to fade into routine. But the war came with her, in the way her hand trembled before dawn, in the way she couldn't sleep through thunderstorms, in the scars she never hid but never explained. To the world she was a mystery, but to the Marines of Echo 12, she was the reason they lived. And though she never expected gratitude, the moment would come years later when those she saved would finally find her again. Not to say thank you, but to remind her of who she was when the fire rose and everyone else turned away. The morning air was colder than usual. A soft mist hung over the quiet streets, and the town hadn't yet stirred awake. Inside May's diner, Isabella Cruz moved as she always did, silent, focused, precise. She flipped the open sign at exactly 6:00 a.m., expecting another ordinary Tuesday. Coffee, eggs, small talk, but outside the world had changed. Across the street, a line of people stood shoulder to shoulder, stretching around the corner. Some wore jeans and jackets. Others stood in plain black coats. But their posture, the way they held their hands behind their backs, the quiet discipline in their stances gave them away. They weren't strangers. They were Marines, and each one held a small cloth-wrapped object. At first, Isabella didn't understand. The first man stepped inside, a tall figure, with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too many desserts. He sat at the counter and nodded at her, his voice low but steady, coffee black, then softer. You don't remember me, do you? Isabella tilted her head. The voice stirred something distant in her memory. He smiled faintly. Major Carter. Brooks Echo. 12. You dragged me out of that fire. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard the name in years. He reached into his coat and placed a small green-wrapped bundle on the counter. I'm not here for breakfast, he said. I'm here to return something. Inside the bundle was a battered Echo 12 medallion, the metal dulled by sand and time. We've been looking for you, he said. A private recognized you last week, said his captain still carried your photo, the one from the field hospital. You were still working, still bandaging others while your own arm was burned. Isabella didn't speak. She couldn't. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded silently. Outside, the line didn't move fast, but one by one they came. Each Marine brought something, a unit patch, a letter, a coin, a photo. Some hugged her. Others could only nod, eyes wet their throats too tight with memory. A young man with a prosthetic leg stepped up next. You probably don't remember me, he said, placing a coin into her hand. But I remember you. You held pressure on my leg while I screamed and cried and cursed. And you told me a joke, something dumb about a camel and a sandwich. And I laughed. That laugh kept me alive. Another Marine older handed her a folded letter. My son was one of the ones you pulled from that truck. He's got 3 kids now. They wouldn't be here without you. By 10:00 a.m., local news had arrived. By noon, the story had spread across veteran networks nationwide. A trucker who had filmed the morning line posted the video with the caption, "She was mocked yesterday. Today the Marines came for her." More veterans showed up, some from across the state. Families of fallen soldiers arrived too, holding photos of sons and daughters who had served beside her. Isabella didn't eat. She didn't take breaks. She stayed at the counter, receiving each visitor like a ceremony. A small girl, maybe 9 years old, approached shyly with her father. She wanted to thank you, the man said. She hears stories about you at night. You're her hero. The girl handed Isabella a small crayon, drawing a woman with a cape carrying someone out of a burning building. Isabella broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft, shaking breath in tears that followed silently. At the end of the day, the donation jar marked Veteran Support Services overflowed with bills and notes. No one mentioned the men who had mocked her. They didn't need to. This wasn't about revenge, it was about remembrance. And for the first time in a long time, Isabella Cruz didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not for her scars, but for what she had carried through them and who she had carried out of the fire. 2 days later, the bell over May's diner door jingled again, this time quieter, almost reluctant. The 3 businessmen from earlier stepped inside. Gone was the easy arrogance they had worn like expensive cologne. Now their movements were stiff, uncomfortable. The leader, the man who had sneered at Isabella's scars, clutched his hat in both hands, twisting it as if unsure how to hold himself. The diner went still, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with expectation, every regular, every Marine still lingering over second cups of coffee, every passerby who had peeked in after the news story they all watched. Isabella stood behind the counter wiping a glass, dry her face. Calm, unreadable. The man cleared his throat. I came to say, I'm sorry, he said, his voice wavered, stripped of the confidence it once held. I judged you without knowing anything about you, about what you carried, about what you gave. Silence stretched across the diner, heavy and thick. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause. Isabella set the glass down carefully. She walked over to the donation jar near the register, the one overflowing with contributions now, and without a word she gently tapped it. The man understood. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded stack of bills, and slipped it into the jar. It joined the countless other offerings left by those who knew respect was better shown than spoken. Isabella met his eyes, steady, quiet, kind, and gave the faintest nod. Nod of forgiveness. She didn't need apologies. She had moved beyond needing anyone's approval. It was simply a nod of recognition. I see that you've changed. Now carry it forward. The men left, heads bowed, and inside the diner, life resumed. Coffee poured. Plates clinked. Conversation started again, but softer, warmer somehow. Margaret Benson watched from the kitchen doorway, a satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You could have kept that money, you know," she said later as they closed for the night. "Lord knows you've earned every penny of it." Isabella just smiled, not the careful, reserved smile she had worn for years, but a full, unguarded one that lit up her face from within. "No," she said simply, "it belongs to all of them, to every hand that's still reaching for a better world." In the following weeks, changes rippled far beyond the diner. The high school principal ordered a plaque for the counseling office that read, "Respect all scars seen and unseen." The local VA clinic hung a photograph of Isabella standing behind the counter. Marines lined up at her door with a simple inscription beneath, "Courage isn't always loud." Other businesses followed, signs appeared in windows, "Veteran-friendly, scar-friendly, human-friendly." May's Diner became more than just a place for pancakes and coffee refills. It became a sanctuary, a quiet beacon for anyone carrying invisible burdens, whether worn on skin or hidden deeper inside. Some nights after the rush died down, Isabella would sit by the window, with her coffee watching the streetlights flicker across the sidewalk. She thought about the girl with the crayon drawing, the Marines who shook her hand, the old man who had left his Purple Heart on the counter and whispered, "You gave me another chance." And she realized something. She hadn't just survived the fire all those years ago. She had become the fire, a light that burned quietly, steadily, refusing to be extinguished by cruelty or time. Her scars didn't define her weakness. They revealed her strength, and now so did everyone else. The invitation came in a simple envelope, hand-delivered to May's Diner one brisk afternoon. Inside was a card embossed in gold, "The Scars That Served," a ceremony of honor for Isabella Cruz, signed by former members of ECHO. 12. At first, Isabella hesitated. She hadn't worn a dress in years, hadn't stood in front of a crowd since her discharge. But when Major Carter Brooks called personally, his voice full of quiet insistence, she found herself saying yes. The ceremony was held at the town's VFW Hall, a modest brick building 3 blocks from the diner. The night of the event, Isabella chose a simple black dress. For the first time in a decade, she left her hair down, letting it fall naturally around her shoulders. She made no effort to hide the scars that traced her jaw and neck. When she stepped into the hall, the entire room rose to their feet. Marines in dress blues, veterans in civilian jackets adorned with patches. Families, children, over 200 faces turned toward her, standing not out of obligation but out of reverence. Isabella froze for a heartbeat, overwhelmed by the sight. Margaret Benson touched her shoulder gently from behind, whispering, "Go on, honey. This is your family, too." Major Brooks met her halfway down the aisle. His voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. "We searched for Isabella Cruz for 7 years. He said, after her medical discharge, she disappeared, as so many wounded warriors do. Some of us feared the worst." He paused, swallowing emotion. "But she didn't disappear. She rebuilt. She carried on. She healed others in ways she may never fully realize." One by one, Marines she had saved stepped forward to share their stories. A man who now coached his son's Little League team. A woman who became a nurse because she remembered how Isabella's hands never shook, even when hers did. A retired colonel who held up a photo of his 3 grandchildren and said simply, "They are here because of you." Tears slipped down Isabella's cheeks, unhidden tracing paths along her scars. When it was her turn to speak, she stood silently for a long moment, the podium cool under her hands. The room waited, not rushing, not pressing, just breathing with her. Finally, she said, her voice quiet but strong, "I never considered myself special. I just did what needed to be done when it mattered most." She touched the scars along her neck lightly. "These aren't marks of tragedy. They are proof that when the fire came, I moved forward not because I was fearless, but because I was afraid and still chose to act." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was steady, heartfelt. The kind of applause that shakes something loose inside your soul. Major Brooks presented her with a shadow box containing her long-lost Purple Heart, a unit commendation that had been approved but never delivered, and a newly commissioned plaque, "For Valor in the Face of Fire, Isabella Cruz, ECHO." 12. A young Marine approached next one she barely recognized now. Older, steadier. He carried his infant son in his arms. "We named him Thomas Isabella. He said shyly, so he always remembers what courage looks like. Quote, that night after the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, Isabella stayed behind a moment longer. She walked to the front of the room where the American flag hung the medals, glinting softly under the muted light. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel it. Pride, not in survival, but in service. In the lives she had touched, in the legacy she had unknowingly built. The scars no longer felt like remnants of a past she wanted to hide. They were now a testament to bravery, to endurance, and to a woman who, when the world burned, became the one who ran toward the flames. And she knew deep in her bones she had never been forgotten. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to step back into the light. Isabella Cruz's story reminds us that true courage often wears the quietest face. In a world quick to judge by appearances, she stood as living proof that scars, whether visible or hidden, are not signs of weakness, but testaments of survival, resilience, and sacrifice. Today in our fast-moving society, it's easy to overlook the quiet heroes among us, the veterans working simple jobs, the neighbors carrying invisible burdens, the people whose battles we never see. Their stories deserve more than passing glances. They deserve honor. Maybe it's time we all ask ourselves, how often do we judge someone without knowing what they've endured? And how many lives have been shaped by people we barely notice? If Isabella's journey touched you or reminded you of someone in your life who carries unseen battles with grace, we invite you to share their name or their story in the comments below. Let's honor them together. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If you believe in celebrating quiet strength, unseen courage, and the dignity of every person, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another inspiring story. And remember, sometimes the strongest souls are the ones who bear their scars and their kindness without ever asking for applause.